Not all jobs are equally vulnerable to automation, and the difference may have less to do with skill level than with the structure of the job itself. My guest today is Luis Garicano, professor at the London School of Economics, former member of the European Parliament, and author of Messy Jobs, one of my favorite recent books. We discuss what AI does and doesn't do to work. Here's our talk. Welcome to the Economics of Work. I'm excited to welcome Luis Garicano, professor at LSE, former member of the European Parliament, and author of Messy Jobs, which, in my opinion, is the best and most important recent book on AI and work. Luis, welcome to the show.
Ben, that's really kind of you to say. I appreciate it. And it's really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it was really excellent and very timely. So I got to start by asking you, what is a messy job and why would someone want one?
Okay, so to easily define it, let's define the opposite, which is a clean job. So a clean job is a job that is single task, that is verifiable, that you perform basically that task repeatedly, and it's subject to reinforcement learning. The more you do the task, the more it gets improved, and eventually AI kind of takes over that simple.
Do clean jobs exist?
I think clean jobs exist. Many jobs are different orders of magnitude of clean. I think if you think of trucks, for example, I always thought like a truck. My co-author Tom Harvard wrote a few articles about trucks, and I always thought the truck drivers did quite a bit of the back end and front end, but they actually don't. Somebody loads the truck, somebody tells them the route, they get the route on the screen, they just drive through the road. So the truck seems as close to a single task clean job as you can get, and
Interesting.
one that is not protected by the messiness is protected by other things that we can discuss. So the single task jobs are only protected by regulation and potentially consumer taste or consumer demand, or the demand, the technological demands on that single task. On the other hand, the messy jobs are bundles of tasks, which include relational, which include commitment, which include judgment, that cannot be easily split apart. So we talk about the strong bundles and weak bundles. And strong bundles are when this coordination cost between the different tasks is sufficiently big that having automation on one task doesn't make it kind of split.
Wait, so let's say there's a job that has lots and lots of tasks, but they are easily split apart. So they're weakly bundled. Is that messy or clean? Like, how would you characterize the example?
I mean, it's
on the spectrum.
we wouldn't say it's a messy job, but it won't remain in that way. So it's not the kind of jobs that we are recommending the prototypical person you were asking me to ask.
Okay.
So these are all tasks. It's a weak bundle, and as a result, messy jobs are strong bundles. So as a result, these will kind of be split by AI. It's not surviving. We talk the key concept to think about this is the autonomy threshold. So the autonomy threshold that we describe in the book is for a certain level of autonomy, for a certain level of AI capability, how well can AI perform this job on its own without human assistance? The autonomy threshold increases in these things. It increases in the messiness. So when it's a clean job, the autonomy threshold is relatively low. When it's a bundle, but it's kind of easily splittable, it's higher. When it's a strong bundle, it's higher. When it has very many relational elements, when it's a bundle of relationships, then it's even higher, to the point that some of these jobs you would expect never to be replaced by AI, and we can discuss about that, of course.
Yeah, so I understand for a person, for a worker, they would want to be in a messy job. What about for society? Like, do we want, I guess society has two objectives here. I mean, obviously a lot of objectives, but the two objectives I'm thinking of are productivity and growth and, employment, healthy labor markets. So I would think if we want maximum productivity from technology, we'd want, technology to be used more widely. We'd want to be able to embed it into processes in the organization maximally. So the ability to kind of unbundle maybe gets us more productivity. Like if you think about, let's say we imagine jobs are completely weakly bundled. Then, anything that AI can do it does, anything that it can't do, it doesn't do, and jobs kind of reconfigure flexibly, and that seems to be the way we get maximum productivity.
Correct.
Is that a fair thing to say? And then,
I think that's fair. I think that's exactly how it would work. The productivity gains are bigger if you can split job than if you keep it together. Because when you keep it together, you're still bound by the supply of hours of the particular person, right? Yeah. So if the truck driver has a human in the loop element that you need somebody to be there just in case, then at the end of the day, the number of hours driven by trucks is limited by how many truck drivers there are. So the supply increase is not as big. Whereas if you can split it, indeed, and you have one guy up somewhere doing just the planning and the trucks get driven on their own, then as you are arguing, indeed, the number of hours supplied gets unbundled, but gets unhinged or unlocked from human hours, and we have infinite or very large supply of trucking. So I see the trade-off, and I agree the trade-off exists. I would say over the longer run, what we have generally found is that technology is a good thing for wages and for growth. And as a result, I would expect that creating messiness on purpose, kind of polluting jobs by making sure that all these things stay, is not a good thing. I mean, I would think it's good. Humans will look for the places where the messiness stays. It would be good to have those jobs where, you're a consultant, you have to convince the client, or you have to extract the information from the client about what is the I would
what I'm really wondering about is is messiness a good, I guess, like, I mean, the way I'm thinking about it is that there's two parts of messiness. One is that there's a large collection of tasks for each job rather than singular tasks, and
Yeah.
that those tasks are strongly bundled rather than weakly bundled.
Yes, that's correct.
And it's not obvious to me that jobs being strongly bundled is good for the economy. I mean, you mentioned we don't want to put artificial barriers, artificial bundle, or, artificial constraints on unbundling. But I wonder if we want to go the other way. Like maybe, is it good for the economy if we get more unbundling and allow jobs to unbundle and rebundle more flexibly? I mean, what do you
Yes.
think?
Yes. So let me say that we have a kind of theoretical argument behind the theory you suggested. We have a paper, Jin Lee, Jiang Hui Wu, and myself were the ones who wrote this piece together, and we show that indeed productivity growth is higher when the bundle breaks apart. There's no question about it. But indeed, because the supply grows much more in that case, then you have lower wages. So
Oh, lower wages? Or yeah, why would you have lower wages? So
the
it
wages
but
drop by more than they would in a strong bundle case, simply because you have the worker who was doing task 1 and 2 is only doing task 1. The task 2 gets unbundled and done by the computer. So the supply into task 1 increases very much.
so the returns accrue to capital. That makes sense. But what about the introduction of new tasks? I mean, if you allow for that, then
Yes, I'm just talking in a very simple framework with two tasks. Let's talk about the bundling part. You're right that all of these other things will be happening on the background. So essentially, the trade-off that you identify works. And if you wanted to increase productivity, could you eliminate the so I guess the question that we are kind of finding tricky and interesting, right, is putting the sand on the gears, kind of slowing the recombination, the rebundling, and the unbundling,
yeah.
kind of preserves things as they are, gives you lower productivity growth, but leaves you with less disruption. Kind of making the mechanism very efficient is going to lead to more turmoil and more more adjustment, but also more productivity growth. And I would say we also talking about the unbundling and rebundling process. I think that the rebundling and unbundling process that we're going to see is very significant. We're going to see a lot of tasks get packed together. We talk, for example, about something David Autor has discussed the new middle class jobs where the cognitive part gets more bundled inside the physical and emotional part. Think of the registered nurse. He or she was already doing holding hands, putting you the injection, etc. Gets more diagnosis ability and can do more, and in some sense, productivity wise, and in terms of middle class kind of distribution of income is probably likely to be good, although we would have to talk about the demand side. That is certainly one rebundling that can happen. There's also a rebundling that can happen when today in the corridors of the Wall Street Journal they were filming. They're talking about the entrepreneur, the one-person company,
The solo entrepreneur. Yeah.
who can and again, it's a rebundling of many tasks that have to do with marketing, with finance. Thanks to the machine, you can do them yourself. So I think the rebundling is a good thing. And I think we should allow the economy to adjust. I don't think it's a different problem than the ones we often face with technology. That is that allowing for adjustment to take place is going to lead to more disruption, but it's what brings you the productivity growth. So I would be more favorable to not kind of putting obstacles to this technological change that will happen. Maybe some slowing down of the recommendations, maybe, but I a priori I would rather not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess it all rests on this idea of how disruptive it is. I mean, one way that maybe is helpful to think about it is that, you can think of the automation as the offense in a way, that's like, automating jobs, but the recombination is kind of defense. So yeah, let me sort of clarify what I mean by that. Like, I mean, you were a former consultant, so you may know this way that consultants get characterized. That people say consultants really do two things: bundling and unbundling. And
I remember Andrew saying, was it Andrew who said this at some point? No, it was it was in the podcast with him, but I remember this.
oh,
He
interesting.
made money by bundling was unbundled and unbundling was yes.
Yeah, and it makes me think of this kind of idea that Brynjolfsson and others have popularized that technological innovation doesn't really get you productivity, but it's technological innovation paired with business process innovation, and business process innovation kind of at its core to me feels like job reconfiguration. You're trying to like
Yeah.
figure out who can do things differently,
Right.
and
Yes.
if you can reconfigure, if you've got some consultants, some business process innovators, whoever they are, who are kind of who have the job of reconfiguring and reshaping, who does what and how things progress, then, if part of those jobs get automated, then the remaining parts can get rebundled in a way that helps workers remain relevant, be productive.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is better than the alternative. So two instances of this. One is the police departments who adopted Comstat in the 2000s and the 90s. Comstat was, for people who are watching us, who watch The Wire, they will remember that the police officers meet in front of a big screen and they're grilled on how they're redeploying their officers. So there was a technological innovation. They got technology that could geocode crime. And Bill Bratton in New York, the police commander at the time, under Giuliani, kind of introduced this new bundle of practices, like this new job redesign. Everybody could be moved around geographically. All the officers, the commanders had to go in front of the chief of the police and explain what they were doing and so on. So indeed, what we find in this paper, it's an empirical paper with Paul Heaton from the Brand Corporation, is that the technology by itself almost didn't do anything. When you give the computers to the departments of police, they don't clear more crimes and they don't reduce crime rates. On the other hand, when you allow this whole reconfiguration and business process redesign, all this rebundling of jobs, you get a big productivity increase. So I think that is absolutely essential to get the productivity gains. You're going to have to allow for this reconfiguration of jobs. And the other example, of course, is Europe versus the US in COVID. The way we did in Europe, the COVID insurance was by allowing the job to keep you employed and paying you the salary from the state during all those months. So that when the job is putting everybody in the freezer, the economy opens up, everybody goes back to the exact time t=0 before COVID. And the US didn't do that. It said, everybody out, you get unemployment insurance, you get this huge reconfiguration of the economy. And the truth is, since COVID, the US has had big productivity growth and Europe hasn't had any. So
Wow, I did not know that that was part of the theory. So let
yes,
me just see if I understand. So it, we have this big shock, which is, obviously a labor supply shock, but also, a just way of working shock. So, remote work and digital tools and Zoom and whatever. So, yeah, I guess like the way that I think about, post-COVID recovery in the US is that, we had this like great resignation, great reshuffle, whatever it's called, where everyone sort of rematched to jobs
yes,
that suited
exactly.
better. Did that not happen in Europe to the same degree?
No, it did not happen. The entire Europe had a furlough scheme that was coming from Germany. It was called Kurzarbeit in Germany, has always existed. When a company has a problem, it puts people on a box from which they get paid and it takes them back. And in this case, that was used for COVID and it was spread to the continent. So in fact, after the COVID, it wasn't a big reconfiguration at all. There was no reconfiguration. So I think there are good reasons. I can see why people are anxious, but I think there are good reasons to allow for this redesign and these processes to change. That requires experimentation. That requires people to be able to make mistakes, and that requires, as a result, that some jobs are lost and some jobs are gained. But I think that's just um, the way that the economy keeps growing. And
That's creative destruction, right?
that's critical disruption. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, one idea I've sort of been grappling with on this, and it's half baked, so bear with me, is that sometimes people contrast technological disruption with the China shock, and I get a little uneasy about the comparison because in the China shock, you had you know products, you know there was a shock to like relative product prices, which affect industries, and those are clustered by geography. So you basically go from like industry to geography. With a technological shock, it affects tasks, which affect occupations, and that's like a sort of many to many dispersed relationship. And then you go from occupations to industry, and that's also a many to many dispersed relationship. And then you go from industry to geography, and that's also kind of like more dispersed than it was before, pre-COVID. So it seems like you have a lot of dispersion at every step, and that the shock is like kind of something that doesn't have very targeted disruption in the same way that the China shock had targeted disruption. So it seems like potentially just more uniform throughout the economy, which feels safer. You have like more ability to kind of adapt. I don't know. What do you think
Yes.
of that comparison?
I agree that geography matters. I think when I studied economics, geography was considered irrelevant. It was like, well, if people lose jobs in geography A, they should move to B and get the jobs. The truth of the matter is, we now understand much better, if not for anything, for the political consequences, the human costs of making very geographically targeted disruption. And you're right, technology could be broader. However, with AI, I think I am spending a few weeks in north of Spain in summer home, and you see all the people that you walk around all day watching, from surf instructors to uh, restaurant owners and waiters and fruit sellers and so on. And you see an entire economy which will not have any impact from AI. Okay?
Right.
And I was with a friend whose kids are doing, they're doing jobs that all of it will be spared completely. Whereas on the other hand, in areas like London, where professional services are very, very significant and where knowledge work is very important, the disruption will be more significant. So I do think that compared to the information technology, which was more skill biased than occupation biased, I mean, I do think, and your data kind of might speak to this in more clear ways than what I am guessing. But the knowledge work is often very clustered. The cognitive tasks. True, there are lawyers and doctors in every village and every place, and but a lot of the high-end cognitive work in the US is in Boston, in New York, etc. And so I'm not sure that it will be more geographically spread as laptops, which basically everybody ended up having one, or mobile phones, which everybody ended up having one. Whatever the disruption was, could probably be considered more broad in the way that you're saying. I mean, that's potentially a concern in terms of where the kind of clean, verifiable cognitive tasks are. I would expect something like places where accountants are concentrated, places where lawyers are concentrated, places where I guess doctors are protected by others of the things we discussed, but like regulation. But those places might be geographically pretty concentrated.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. That's a good point. I mean, I wasn't really thinking about like these places where everyone's like a surf instructor. Like certainly they're protected, you know. Um, so one thing that you've argued in the past, which seems so interesting and relevant, is that in organizations, ultimately the scarcity within organizations is kind of like knowledge and expertise about like how things work, so that you can escalate. And in a world where it looks like maybe knowledge, expertise is becoming more abundant, what does that do to an organization? Like, how does that how does that manifest to the hierarchies and like how organizations look on the inside?
Okay, thanks for the question. I will bring people up to speed, since you're making a reference to my work on hierarchy. So basically, the idea of the knowledge hierarchy and the hierarchy organization of expertise, which I spent a lot of my career working on, was, look, acquiring expertise is very expensive. What we do is we leverage that expertise by having the experts only work on the exceptions and having a lot of people work on the routine jobs. And that's a hierarchy, which is a knowledge-based hierarchy. Basically, the exceptions get escalated. As Sloan like to say, he didn't work on the details because those never get up to him. And when something gets up to him, Sloan, CEO of General Motors, it was the exceptions. He said the exceptions, not the petty details. So that's indeed the hierarchical organization of knowledge. And the question is, what happens when you put an LLM in there? So one thing I would say is a lot of the knowledge that is important in organizations that has to do with implementation of decision, has to do with what different aspects of the organization get affected by a particular decision, etc. That knowledge is not the clean, repeated, verifiable type. This is kind of messy. It's in people's heads. It's tacit. It's, as Polanyi would say, it's also dispersed, as Hayek would say. And the rarities, meaning because of the way the hierarchy works, it's going to be higher up, placed higher up, the exceptions, the less likely that the verification, that the algorithm is going to eventually learn it. Because there are not so many of the exceptions that correspond to this company, that it's tacit within this company that people understand, but not somewhere else, etc. So my expectations is that the work of a higher end managers will remain more or less undisrupted, that there will be exceptions for them to consider, and decisions on those exceptions to be made. That the work of the frontline employees, enhanced by AIs, will change, it will shift, it will rebundle, it will move up, etc. And that the main organizational change will be middle managers on both sides are probably going to be squeezed. A lot of what they do is knowledge processing, information processing, passing on things, solving the middle problems, etc. The machines can do a lot of that. So I would expect the hierarchy to compress. I would expect organizations to get smaller. I don't expect organizations to go away. I mean, the idea that agentic AI can somehow replace an organization, I just don't think that's likely. I was, you know how I introduced the book with this example about the family. Yeah, just to make the analogy to the CEO. So you have all the cognitive tasks for the following day in your mind solved. You know where you have to take the kids, you know what you have to do, you know when you have to drive home, what the breakfast is, what the meal is, and all those things. Then you wake up and your kid says, I don't want to go to the swimming pool. And that is a task that is a management task to try to figure out what to do with a kid, to try to persuade the kid, to try to convince them, etc. That is completely unaffected by AI, right? So the top managerial task of kind of getting the organization from A to B and getting people to want to go from A to B and to all those kind of exceptional decisions, I think stay.
Let me ask you. I mean, you're a father, right?
Yes, I'm father of two boys.
Okay, and you also kind of like, you know, are sort of a manager in your life. You know, you manage
Yeah.
postdocs and junior authors and all that. So, do you think being a parent has made you a better manager professionally?
I think those two things are quite connected. I think the kinds of things that make you a good father, setting clear expectations, living by example, not just what you say, but what you do is what matters. Um, uh, Letting people delegating and having lots of freedom within those frameworks you have, as you have said. I think those things are being consistent, which is so essential to both. And I think both things are similar. Now, which direction does it go? Um, I mean, it's funny, right? Nobody really tells you about that when you become a father.
Yeah.
Those things just happen, and you hope that you know what you're doing. Um, but I think both are reinforcing for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when you gave that example in your book, I really resonated with it
Yeah.
because, you know, it is management. Like when when you're getting your kids, ready for to go to school, like you do have to kind of manage a
You, how many kids do you have?
I have 3 young kids. So I have 3 daughters. The
So
old
the management task is
Oh, it's way more complex than managing Rebellion Labs. It's,
yeah.
um Yeah, I mean, my youngest is just a month, so, like, very, very new. So that is disruptive in a way that organizations also have disruption and, like, new employees and new people, and, like, yeah, it is yeah, it's, like, it's surprising how much of a parallel there is.
Yes,
Yeah,
and we want to deploy it to counter this extreme rationalist view in Silicon Valley. When they talk about, you know the data well. When they talk about, oh, I heard a top executive from an AI company say in a meeting I was, oh, we've solved coding. We think we'll solve computer tasks, meaning general office jobs within another 18 months. And that means they don't actually understand what is an office job. And that was in part the motivation to do. That's my first paragraph of the book. It's just what our first paragraph of the book is like, what the hell? I mean, there is very little in there that is the exact same thing you did before. And that is kind of, and that is just like verifiable. And that, I mean, there's a lot of context in all of that. There's a lot of conversations in the corridors. There's a lot of temper tantrums, like with your kids, and
yeah,
that's why I redeploy the family example, because I think that's the way to get to the readers, to that question of, imagine all the information about the day is deployed in front of you magically and perfectly. Would that get the task of getting the 3 girls out of the door in the morning like much easier? A little bit, but there's a lot of stuff that remains, right?
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because that even that, I mean, I think, the mantra that you've introduced that I find myself saying all the time is the task is not the job. And
Yes.
that is it's so important to remember that.
Yeah.
And even getting kids out the door for breakfast is not really a task. It's a bundle of tasks. You have to
All those things.
tie someone's shoes and get their lunch ready and take them to there's a lot of stuff that has to be done.
Exactly. And somebody says, "Oh, I have," it's like when they talk about a project management job. Well, I mean, it seems like they must be thinking that the project manager sits there all day looking at the Gantt chart, and the thing is so much more messy. I mean, the electrician doesn't come, and you need to get the painter to come earlier because the electrician didn't come, and the painter doesn't want to come, and I mean. the Gantt chart goes out of the door, like Moltke said in the first minute of the battle, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's also true for engineering. Like, I think, people talk about software engineering as like, oh, it's clearly well defined. You just need to like, you know, push your code and like the end. But no, you're also, owning something and, dealing with all the complexities that come up and,
Yeah.
dealing with how things fit together. It's like very hard to foresee. But yeah, engineers have messier jobs than I think we are sometimes led to believe,
Yes.
by the AI companies who think about it, just as the coding task.
Exactly. Exactly. And the truth of the matter is, and you can tell me what you see in the very, very last batches of the data, but it doesn't seem like the job openings are dropping even in those positions, correct?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think you do see like some,
You see
particular
less
things that
growth,
only
right?
you see what?
Less growth in programming and coding than otherwise, right? That's what that
Less
Federal
growth.
Reserve study San Luis shows.
Yeah, yeah, but it's by yeah, I think the magnitude is something like 5.5%, um, since 2022. So it's like pretty slow, actually.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but
And that includes COVID reorganization, all these other things, of course.
right, right. That's true. That's true. So let me push back against one point you made about sort of the organization getting squeezed and kind of like squeezing out middle management. So I think the argument you put forth makes sense. That you have this kind of like, you know better synthesis of information, between the bottom and the top, and like potentially cleaner escalation. But let me make a case for middle management being the real heroes of AI. So see if this kind of makes sense. But if we think about, work reconfiguration, one way to think about that is that, you have things at the top. You have the demand for work activities, you have the demand for tasks as a kind of fluid process. You know, the client needs something, someone, there's some priority, some reconfigure, so you have the people at the top who like have changing needs all the time. Needs change a lot. So you have some like fluid demand. And then at the bottom, you have workers who are executing on things, and there's fluid movement there too. People decide they don't like something, someone quits, they,
Yeah.
want to pursue something else. So there's changes at the top, there's changes at the bottom, and the middle manager is kind of the liaison. The middle manager has to kind of do this bargaining between like the needs at the top, the capabilities at the bottom, and that is just a complicated thing to continually manage. And one thought is that, as technology grows and maybe accelerates, then then there's more variance, there's more volatility in what's required at the top, more volatility in what's required at the bottom, and you just have to have this kind of constant, you know, task bargaining. And that is the role. They're the mediators of these needs. So maybe they can like play an even bigger role. I mean, what do you
Yeah.
think?
So it's similar to the last phrase of the article I just wrote, the Substack I just wrote on what are consultants getting paid for, which is like, hey, maybe we have a Jevons effect on managers, which is if we have more proposals and cheaper proposals, and a lot of decisions need a lot of input from many people, and information is dispersed, and we need to collect all this information and get people, then it could be that many more easy proposals coming up require many more meetings, and at the end, that's more consulting and more management. So I see what you're saying, and I think it's a legitimate. It's not just legitimate, but actually completely correct. I also think, however, that part of what's going on is, um, like always with productivity effects, you are going to have. So you have both of what you're saying and what I'm saying. So we have more problem solved per minute, and that squeezes down the ranks of problem solvers. But at the same time, more problem generation as generating problems becomes very, very cheap. And that makes those people who are trying to kind of get the consensus and so on, mm, mm, they will need to be more involved. So I think that there could be a Jevons effect, a Jevons paradox of the kind you're suggesting for managers and for consultants, as uh, as a lot of possibilities. Like we were talking before we started the chat about how I and you and many others are working more than ever before AI. And there is this, again, Jevons paradox for effort, that even though we are more productive each hour, we are producing much more and doing many more hours. You could produce the same in less hours, but every project seems attractive. And so we generate more projects, and then everybody else has to also work more and filtering those projects. So I can see that paradox as a possibility, and it's certainly it's not impossible that that's what we'll see.
Yeah, it really makes me think of, Claudie Golden's characterization of greedy work, where you have jobs that just need to take up all your time, and you have to constantly be, engaged with the work. You can't really
Yeah.
step out. And I wonder if technology is making jobs more greedy. And then, of course, as Claudia Golden pointed out, like that has major implications for families. Um, yeah, I mean, do you think that is likely that that jobs become kind of greedier with AI?
I I feel like that's been the case for me. I don't know if it's a general thing. I definitely the hours are encroaching on many other family activities. Um, and I don't know if it's a general thing. For me, it has to do definitely with this feeling that uh, a so there's the context switching, which means that you have multiple things going on and you can just kind of do many more different things at the same time. You have things in parallel.
Yeah.
Uh, B, the idea that everything that you have, just a very preliminary idea, becomes visible, so you can explore it. Maybe you drop it, but you explore it. S- and also the sense that, hey, I I have this possibility now that I didn't have before. I want to try it out. So all of those things are different elements in this enormous individual labor supply elasticity that I didn't expect, which is that um, it's definitely kind of increased for me and for many people I talk to. The
Yeah.
the
Well,
the demands.
in fairness, I mean, you and I are probably really bad examples here because, we study organizations and labor markets, and this is like our moment, so it could be that you're so, excited and in demand just because this is, the
This is
world.
the shock my whole life has been waiting for in some sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I left academia to go to politics, and I did a few years in the European Parliament, and then I go back, and then my work is more relevant than ever, and all of these things are happening, which I have as prism to watch and to understand. So it's been a really interesting. It could be very idiosyncratic. You're right.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, it's like, I'm glad you're back in academia because 'cause you're writing so many interesting things, but do you think you would be doing as many interesting things if you were still in politics?
No, no. Politics it's very hard to actually produce. I mean, politics is the ultimate messy job where you need big coalition of people. You have very, very short bandwidth for each problem. So things come in your desk and there's been people already working on it and they tell you like, okay, if we want you to check or to verify or to approve, and you do 2 million things a day, none of them in depth. It's almost the opposite. It's the least cognitive and most relational and most messy and intricate job possible, where every day, every minute of every day is completely different and you have no idea what's going to hit you the following day with some big crisis, some big thing that didn't work the way it should, and so on. It's very, I can see why people who are adrenaline junkies get hooked on it. I didn't get hooked because I was more stressed than excited by this sensation that everything can explode every minute of the day. I mean, I guess you're an entrepreneur, so this sensation is more present in you than me. This feeling that everything can go bust in 5 minutes. But in politics, it really is like that. Somebody feels tell something to the newspaper about you that might be completely wrong, might be completely invented. Suddenly you're in the middle of a huge crisis that you thought you were on holiday, you thought you were doing something else. So it's very difficult to in that world to be intellectually productive.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Huh. Okay, good to know. I wanna make sure to talk about early career stuff because I think that's a question on everyone's mind.
Yes.
And, it's people are freaking out, young people are freaking out.
Yeah.
So what is I mean, I think the narrative that I hear a lot is that, young sort of sort of like entry level work is being automated. People don't rely on, the early career people to do kind of the menial tasks like getting a PowerPoint deck ready. And so the career ladder is kind of broken. And that presents a challenge for young early career professionals. What do you make of that? Is that a real thing? Do you think
Yeah.
there's some like,
So I
you know,
I wrote a paper with Luis Garicano on careers in the age of AI, where we have a little bit of a different spin. So let me tell you what we think about apprenticeships and what we think of how they change. The bottom line is not all that dark. So an apprenticeship is a an exchange, is a relational exchange between a master and an apprentice. And you basically are solving the following problem. Um, you want to receive general training, you want to learn to be a lawyer, you want to learn to be a doctor, but you don't have the money to pay for that. And as Becca said, the way you solve that is by mm, paying you too little, but the amount of money that they will have to pay you by too little is just not enough. There's a budget, there's a constraint there, minimum wage, let's say. So the way you do it, the way you solve the bargain is the menial tasks are the currency the junior uses to pay the senior. So I will pay you to be on Relio, and you ask me to do basic programming. And the way I pay you is I do the basic programming. In exchange, every day I learn from you interesting stuff. So the problem, the way we frame the problem a little bit differently than what usually it's framed at, is the AI ability to do those simple verifiable tasks, including PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets and all the things you mentioned, is devaluing the currency which the juniors use to pay for the training. So the juniors pay for the training in spreadsheets. Now spreadsheets are what's zero. I can do million spreadsheets in the next 5 minutes. So don't pay me with that. There is
it's
nothing.
a very nice framing. It's a very elegant framing of this. Yeah. No, go on.
Yeah. So value is the currency. And what we argue is, look, I mean, clearly, to the extent, so there are two things that are going on. Things that you used to pay. So the saleable knowledge is being reduced because all these things are done by the AI. But at the same time, the ceiling, what the expert can do with his knowledge goes up. To the extent that the ceiling goes up sufficiently fast and faster than the floor, that the minimum that AI can do. So what an expert with AI can do relative to what an AI on its own can do, then there's still a gap that can fill by training, and there's still value in this expert training. You starting you higher up, but there's still value. To the extent that the bottom is growing, but the ceiling is not, then it really kind of shuts down the train channel, and there's not enough saleable knowledge, there's not enough currency that I can deploy in order to pay you. So two consequences.
Well, I'm just this idea of like if you, I think that makes sense when there is kind of a floor on wages. Then I understand that like the apprentice case is like a very valuable edge case. But in the case where there's a very highly paid entry level job, there seems like a lot of buffer for wages to just go down. Like if someone, becomes an investment banker straight out of college, they're doing menial work. And if that gets automated, then maybe instead of getting paid $150,000 a year, they get paid $80,000 a year. Like on the margin, there seems to be a lot of flexibility for highly paid entry level work. So is that just like, an issue on wages and less an issue on like, this edge case of like needing a floor?
The entry level work rents are very, very high. So if you think of what a lawyer gets paid per hour when they enter, which is like 400 or something like that. And when they get built up, which is like, at the top law firm, which is like several thousand, the gap is still very, very large. So the rents you're paying for the training are very significant. And I think they're very large relative to the wage. The wage looks high to us, but relative to the rents that are being captured are not as high. So, but you go in a direction that I did want to go, which is the following. The news is not all bad. So if these kind of very long if the menial tasks are not the knowledge, if what you're learning is not really to do spreadsheets, they're just using the spreadsheets to pay for your training, and that shortens a bit, and there's less of that menial part. That's not necessarily bad news. That means the training gets shortened, you get to the senior level faster. That's not very bad news. It's only very bad news when it shortens sufficiently that then it's not worth it anymore. So
Right.
there are two effects. One is shortening the training period. Another one is, which is a bad thing, which is a good thing, sorry, which increases your welfare because you don't spend as much time on menial tasks. The other one is potentially fully eliminating the intensive and the extensive margin, potentially fully eliminating the job. My sense is that a lot of those tasks that you were mentioning at the start of your question, the PowerPoints and the Excels and all of those things are indeed well accomplished by AI, and that the content of the training is going to have to be reconsidered and rethought. And it's going to have to move towards those messy tasks. It's going to have to be, those juniors are going to have to be learning more about presenting to the clients, interacting with the clients. I was talking to a consultant recently, was telling me exactly that. What their juniors do is much more relational than it was 4 years. A second year junior is doing, first year junior is doing what a second or third year would do in terms of those tasks. So that might be a positive development in this sea of worry for all the juniors.
That sounds very nice to me. I mean, I think, when you step back, it seems crazy that these very, talented, qualified people are formatting PowerPoint. It's
Yeah. Yes. And
waste.
reading, like, if you go to career path, so there are two interpretations of what happens in career path, right? You spend 3 years reading contracts because that's how you learn. I'm sorry, it seems too inefficient to me. The other is to spend 3 years proving contracts because it's very important for the managers and for the partners. And that's how you pay for getting trained. And that second is the way we see it. And if that second is true, shortening it is not such a terrible thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that sounds right. I mean, you mentioned this Becker problem before that, that firms may not have an incentive to train you in generalizable knowledge and, have more of an incentive to train you in firm specific knowledge. To me, that feels like, I mean, for sure that's kind of true, although like you need some general knowledge to do firm specific knowledge. So they
Yes.
have to, produce some positive externality. It would be very hard to avoid that completely. And it seems
But in
like,
our model,
yeah.
the way they do the general knowledge, the way you pay for your general knowledge is with these menial tasks. So the firm ends up solving the backup problem. And the way they solve the backup problem in our 2017 AR paper is with this relational contract in which each period of time I do some menial task and you transfer me some knowledge. And the reason I stay in the job is because the net present value of staying is higher, and the reason you pay me is because what I'm producing for you in each period is sufficient to that's the action that you get. Sorry.
One thing, no, that's it's a great point. I mean, one thing it's making me think of is that, as we think about net present value, like the key parameter in that is how long people stay in their job. It's like the attrition rate. But,
Hey,
one thing I've been saying a lot that I view as a bad thing, but now it's making me think maybe there's a good side of it is that, right now I feel like one of the most like toxic characteristics of AI today is the job search and match process. That, candidates can just apply to, 100 jobs a minute and like, there's like low
information.
information jamming, signal jamming, information overload.
Totally.
So it seems like a really bad thing because people are not able to find jobs easily. And I suspect that it's resulting in like low hiring rates and attrition rates at least in the US, like hiring and attrition, the rate at which people move jobs is like basically an all-time low. And that seems really bad because people can't like match and find the right employer. But it does have this silver lining that maybe it incentivizes training more. And at the same time, higher ed seems to be becoming less valuable on the margin. I don't know, maybe that's too spicy of a take, but it seems
No,
like
I
maybe.
think it's
Yeah.
I think it's a likely pattern we will see is the one that you're identifying of a substitution between higher ed and on-the-job training for the reasons that we are discussing. So the higher education worker that doesn't know how to do anything on the job and doesn't get trained in relational aspects um, kind of loses uh, relative value relative to someone who is being trained on the job and getting all this other exposure. If indeed, as you say, mobility declines, that's more easy for firms to recoup those investments. That was Acemoglu's and Pischke's defense of the German training system that it induces more of that investment in training. So this would be a move in that direction.
Yeah, that seems like a very positive thing. I mean, it doesn't solve the assessment problem that higher ed presumably solves,
Yeah,
but it
which has a
you
bit
just said.
stopped solving it. So we've been shooting ourselves in the foot by not giving informative grades and not using SATs and not using all of this information that we could be using. Um, we are kind of not doing our job of making our credentials signal value. And we're going to have to, in a world where all the other credentials are depreciated, we should go back to a world where we say, hey, come here, you get a credential and you get a grade, and the grade will be meaningful. I would say the UK universities have done a better job at that.
Yeah.
So
I mean, my optimistic take is that I think the vibe is shifting a little bit, and I think people are starting to feel like, okay, this great inflation is like, getting too ridiculous, and we have to, treat, you know, higher education institutions as like, more like more of their purpose in providing assessment and signals.
totally,
Yeah.
totally.
So yeah,
I think it's a thing. At least professors are very aware. Um, Administrators and parents and students, I don't know how aware are they, but it definitely is the case that, for example, in UC Berkeley recently there was all this discussion, and clearly the fact you want to reintroduce admission standards and so on, and I think that the vibe is changing is probably true.
at least economics professors. I don't know about
Yes.
the rest of the fields. Um, yeah, so while we're on the topic of, vibe shifts, one final question for you, and is what is the feeling in Europe about technology and progress generally? I mean, I know you mentioned like since COVID, you know, growth in Europe has been weaker than it has been in the US. Um, and that's, you know, concerning. How are people feeling in Europe? I mean, what is the vibe over
Very
there?
concerned. I think the question is really very, very important. You probably know about Stephanie Stancheva and Sandra Sequeira and co-authors' paper recently in the ER about zero-sum thinking. Uh, and basically what they find is that zero-sum thinking, the idea that what you lose, I win, uh, has spread out and spreads out when there is low growth. So this kind of,
That idea seems to be spreading in the US quite a bit
yeah,
also.
yes. So the idea that, oh, I control the rents and that way the landlord can get more money, and without thinking, okay, but wait a second, people have to do repairs in the house, they have to invest in housing, they have to build new houses. How are you going to get that? That idea is left, and it's only about zero sum. It's indeed happening in the US as well. I would say in Europe right now, the progress movement that you see in the US emerging is really not emerging yet. I'm going to do my best to get it going, and my Substack Silicon Continent is a big part on that, of my effort on that. The general kind of sense of Europe is one of stagnation and of inability to move forward. And it has to do very much with the mentality, but it also has to do very much with the demographics. Politics is very much driven by those who vote, and those who vote are overwhelmingly older. They have a higher propensity to vote, and there are many. And you get a new dynamic prime minister in the UK. And what is his big idea? Is care homes. And his big speech yesterday was about how it's unfair that people have to sell their flat in order to move into a care home. And he's going to do everything to pay that with taxes. And that means a young person who's trying to build his life is going to have to pay so that his grandfather doesn't have to sell his house to go to, every time you move from one house to the next, you sell the previous one. Why wouldn't you not do that when you are going into a care home? So it doesn't make sense from a policy perspective, but it makes huge sense from the politics perspective. And the politics of Europe is we are doing everything possible, think the politicians, to make sure that we have the voters of the elderly. And that means transfers always come first, investments come next, and you see almost everywhere uniformly investment as share of GDP is dropping, while transfers are increasing. That's the European disease right now. And it has a difficult solution, because if it was just the mentality and the ideology, you could see a kind of Thatcher-like figure coming and saying, let's free the markets out. But it has to do with demographics, and older people are like, Europe's pretty good. I live well. I have a good place to go for coffee, and I have a good pension, and I have good friends, and nothing needs to change. And that big constituency of nothing needs to change is not going to be persuaded, because the way they see it, things are fine. And let me give you one example on that. Almost the entire GDP growth of Spain since 2008 has been dedicated to the 65 plus. Almost the real wages haven't almost increased. The real pensions have increased very significantly. And that tells you where the actual political power is.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because, as we continue aging as a society, we are going to need growth to pay for that.
Yes, I think that's my
Yeah.
my main message from my One Silicon Content blog and Substack, and that's the thing that I try to get Europe to realize and to accept. But it's gonna be very hard. And I'm glad to see the US has this abundance movement, both in the left and the right, that thinks that growth is important and growth needs to come back. That's just not a debate here.
Okay. Well, I hate to end on a more pessimistic note, but there was enough optimism, talking about, jobs and organizations. So thank you so much for being part of the show. I have to recommend your
Really
book.
enjoyed it.
Messy Jobs. It's excellent. And your Substack, Silicon Continent, is also really great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, man. It was really my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. The Economics of Work is brought to you by Rebellion Labs, workforce data for research and benchmarking. If you enjoyed, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. It'll help us reach other curious listeners. I'm your host, Ben Zweig. Our producer is Cole Wagner. Thanks for listening.